I'm Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and welcome to my vlog, where it's both my mission and simultaneously my pleasure to highlight my creative journey in hopes of inspiring you, giving you a specific takeaway, all that way so your journey can be at least a little bit easier, right? Now, there's lots I want to talk about, but before I fully dive into things, I would like to take the opportunity before doing so to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So, last episode of the vlog, if you follow along week to week, I sort of talked about this notion that, essentially the world, as it were, became a lot more clear to me, right? This sort of disillusionment of what once was to seeing what is and being able to navigate within that, right? And, oftentimes, like there's a Byron Katie quote that says, "When you argue against reality, you suffer." Now, that's true in any capacity, but what I realized was that there's also the version of it where you argue against reality and you don't really know that that is what you're doing, right? You're not doing it at a conscious level. And so I kind of look back, in the past, let's say, couple weeks of I was really arguing against reality without sort of knowing it. And what I mean by that is that I was trying to force square pegs in round holes or something like that, right? I had a different perspective, albeit an illusion, of how this business operated, right? And it kind of came to a head of like, no, that's not the case, really, right? And I encourage you to sort of listen to that episode, albeit it can be a little bit jumbled, but essentially, ever since Discovery and their takeover of Warner Brothers, that's really shaken up the film industry, and just sort of my own dealings within the business and how I view it. And so it's given me this sort of new resolve now to really just take ownership of my projects in a way that I've been doing, but not necessarily all the way through. And, now I look at marketing as part and parcel of it all, both in terms of time, effort, resources, and budget, right? And really that's the way to ultimately succeed. And unfortunately, that's putting on all the various hats. But it's also why I call myself the 360 Creative Coach, is because we have to essentially do all of this stuff in order to succeed as an indie artist, right? We have to wear multiple hats, and yes, it is quite draining. It prolongs the efforts, and if we find people along the way that are willing to help us, great, embrace those people and support those people in return. But unfortunately, the idea that, that as an indie artist that you won't succeed, or that you can succeed without really putting in all the effort into the marketing as well, it's just not really realistic, right? Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's not really realistic. And so that's the angle at which I approach things now. And also, too, I just started looking at things and, as I'm apt to do, question them. Because a lot of things, much like in psychology, you examine things, and through Byron Katie's methodology, you sort of question of like, is this true? Can I know that it's true? And just in the entertainment industry, however you want to term that, whether it be music, poetry, writing novels, movie making, and anything in between, right? Painting, all that stuff, right? there's certain myths that we've bought into, and what's been fascinating is continually to look at history and how those ideologies didn't exist even like 100 years ago, let alone like for millennia and so forth. And so these things that we hold as true, with a capital T, aren't actually even lowercase t true. And that kind of can bug people the wrong way, because they're so used to being prescribed a certain way of doing things, and so forth, right? And the reason I'm kind of opening up with marketing and so forth is because, I was talking with a friend, and it just seems like in today's day and age, when it comes to art, the gatekeepers, if you want to call them that, or just in general, like there's a laziness associated with things, where it's like if it becomes too difficult to break through the noise, it's not worth it. And it's just not true. Like there's incredible works of art that penetrate all the time, and vice versa. There's all these like things that we think will explode because based on the formula and market needs, and it just doesn't end up being the case. And so for me, I've really kind of come to this idea that I just really want to show a new path of doing stuff, right? Even this idea of like, well, it's show business, and people tend to forget that it is a business first. It's like, well, art didn't used to be a business, right? Historically, it wasn't really a business. We've commodified it in such a way, but there's a cultural aspect associated throughout history, and people recognize it as such. Maybe we've gotten away from it from an American perspective, but certainly within other nations, there's film grants that fund all kinds of art because they see an inherent value of art and being able to push society. And that's a beautiful thing, right? And that's, again, how I sort of look at things, is just that questioning and examining, and essentially in psychology they call them limiting beliefs. The beliefs that you hold that prevent you from being your true nature, from doing what you love, and from ultimately succeeding however you define that to be. And so for me, I've essentially gotten away from that. But I think, people buy into these limiting beliefs because, again, it becomes very easy to reinforce that. Society certainly reinforces it. And that part of ourselves that is scared feeds into that. So we do play small. And, someone very well-intentioned, and a lot of people do this too, they ask like, what's your focus? What do you want to do in, 5 to 10 years? Like if you could do it, what would it be doing? And my answer really is, I'm already doing it. And of course, I would love to do the things that I'm doing on a larger scale, but, maybe I'll get there, maybe I won't, but I'm still doing the thing. I'm still writing books, making movies, supporting my friends, having fun, learning, reading great books, playing soccer, right? Like, that's all part of what I want to be doing in life. And so I've orchestrated my life to be able to do that stuff. And so when people say and give sort of advice, I think it's a projection of, again, not really what they haven't even examined it. I know they haven't, right? And someone's telling me like, well, focus on just making short films and you'll succeed, that'll be like the thing, and then it'll hit, and then then people buy into it, and you'll then eventually make feature films. And I'm like, well, I already get to make feature films, So if the goal is to make a short to get to a feature film, I'm not interested in that because I'm already doing the feature films, right? in fact, I want to go quite the opposite. I want to make a trilogy, right? And I don't want to play in that small way. And it's interesting because, in my bathroom, I've posted sort of, these sentences that encompass my nature, right? So with my therapist, we did this a while ago, what my purpose is, to get better and better and better and better. Like that's, my purpose in life. My sentence, this could be considered like what you would write on someone's tombstone after they pass. And mine was, he lived his life to its fullest. My goal is to realize my potential. My genius is problem solving, and my dream is to be part of a family that I love, right? And family being a more encompassing term rather than just blood relatives, right? And so when you sort of look at it like that, yeah, playing small for me is just literally not part of my nature. I would be going against who I am if I was to do things that are disingenuous to me just because, like, that's the way you're supposed to do it. And I think why I've been able to succeed with the things that I have is because I am bold about it, and it does come from that pure place, and therefore I'm able to be creative within that and maximize it and do what I intended and really bring people along because they believe in that shared ideology of, like, let's make something as crazy as it sounds, we're going to go for it, and it's going to be really special. Coupled with, my gift of problem solving, which really just is sticking with the problem longer, right? Like I really believe we can all solve problems. It's not like I've been given this genius of problem solving. It's more so that, in my life, I've faced a lot of problems and I find it fun, like a puzzle, to figure this out. And I just literally stick with the problem longer. It's one of my very first lessons that I put out is, Einstein had that notion of just stick with the problem longer and you can solve it. But people too oftentimes give up prematurely. In fact, it's when I tell people, like, I've never really failed at my projects, they go, whoa, you've never failed it, blah, blah. I'm like, no. I've had missteps and I had failures along the way, 100%, and I've done that, like, many, many a times. But as far as what the overall intent and completing that thing, no, I've yet to fail. Because I just stuck with it until it was what I desired it to be. And this includes making some short films when I was younger, like probably 5 or 6 times until I finally got what I was really after. And at the time, you feel deflated because you're having to, like, essentially redo the work over and over. But how's that different than a film doing reshoots or something like that, which they do on a very high budget professional level? So that to me is sort of the inspiring aspect. And also for me, I had a great interview with Satya Doyle Bayok, who wrote the book Quarter Life, which essentially examines people roughly from like age 18 to about 40 and how, the search for self in early adulthood, the search for meaning. And we examined her ideology through the lens of the book and the movie Wild, as well as Into the Wild, right? Which are both based on true events of Cheryl Strayed and Christopher McCandless. And it was just great to sort of be able to chat with her because it was so inspiring. And what it really reinvigorated for me was the return. So if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, think like every like major movie that you probably love. Let's take like Indiana Jones. There's a call to action. Indiana Jones has to go retrieve the the, in the Last Crusade, right? They're after that, but of course the real call to action is going to save his father. There's the journey itself, and then after the journey, there's the return. And most works of fiction, the return is very brief, right? Because it's not sexy, right? The story's over. But in life, the return is one of the most important things, because you have to reintegrate your society after having been irrecoverably changed. And to me, that interview just kind of brought back to surface, stuff that I'd known, but it made me just connect the dots in a way that it brought it to the forefront that I had not been thinking of. But when we talk about, as Gandhi says, be the change that you wish to see. Oftentimes we complain about the world and so forth, and it's like, how do we expect the world to change if we don't change ourselves? Right? And so, to some it might sound naive, but yeah, I want to essentially be an example of eradicating limiting beliefs from people through the example that I set. And, if I can do that, will I solve the world and will I inspire the world? No. But I know I don't need to. I think we overburden ourselves with the impact that we have to have, and then we don't do anything because we're paralyzed by that notion. When in reality, first off, the right thing to do is always the right thing to do, right? So even if it doesn't have an impact on someone else, it's okay because it's the right thing to do. But, by doing it and doing it well and over the course of, years, decades, and so forth, it will draw in people. Now, how many, I don't know, but it will. And that's the other part of this, too, is the notion, again, as far as a myth, the idea of followers and needing more followers to be successful as an artist and so forth. And Kevin Kelly, through his incredible 1,000 True Fans article, really disproves that theory. What he argues is, as long as you have 1,000 true fans that are willing to pay you $100 a year, you can make a good living, right? Certainly by society standards. Now, if you have people that you need to pay and so forth, and your expenses, then yeah, of course that number has to go higher. But that's a lot more doable than being okay, I need 1 million followers on Instagram or TikTok or this and that, right? So I think there's a lot of effort that's put into amassing an audience as opposed to finding the right audience. And this happens all the time where people literally will try to sell to people who will never be their customers. I experience it all the time from people, and I'm like, I literally tell them, I am not your customer. I will never be your customer. Please, you're wasting your effort. Go utilize your time, your resources to find those people. And that's why, for me, I've rolled up marketing into what I do because, yeah, even with the stuff that I have created, there's an audience for it, right? And to a degree, I've reached some of those people, but certainly there are more people to reach. And when I say that, it really doesn't come from a disingenuous place. I think that's, I don't know, I really do look at it as a community and, about bringing value to people in the best way that I can. And that could be as simple as entertaining someone, or it can be like this right here, right now that I'm doing, of providing, wisdom, information, knowledge, whatever you want to call it, so they can utilize it, right? But again, having a small impact rather than a wide impact, but instead a small, very wide impact, that's better than a lot of people with very little depth behind it. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I've been looking at things. And, even just afterwards, once I've kind of like given myself this new resolve in life to eradicate limiting beliefs, the idea that like, oh, I'm spread too thin or whatever. Well, so are people like Gary Vee, right? And he's very successful, and he talks about it all the time how people tell him to sort of focus and he would be more successful, and he's like, that's just not in my nature. And so when we talk about being self-aware, that's a key component of it. But the sad part is I don't think a lot of people are as self-aware as they think they are. The fact that like we need videos and tutorials to teach us how to breathe or when to even drink water. It's like we've gotten so away from like listening to our own bodies. How can we claim to be self-aware? We're not. I know I'm not. But I'm trying to be, right? And, I was talking with my therapist, and, one of the things that he was joking about was this idea that, people try to have these hacks for life. Being vegan or whatever, like these diet and exercise things and whatever else to just like prolong and be healthy their lives and yada, yada, yada. When in reality, like, yes, all that stuff matters. I'm not saying it doesn't. But our lives would be made so much more better, and we could extend our lifespans just by the simple fact of just being present. And people will say they are and so forth, but I've seen people be tested, and like, most times, very few people get beyond like 1 or 2% of actually being present in any given moment. It's crazy. And so in that way, it's like I try to study the people, what are the secrets of the people that have broken through to that enlightened state. And by the way, enlightenment, I think this is this very fancy term, but again, just keeping it simple and keeping it with Byron Katie. She said, I don't know what enlightened means, but I've been on the other side where, I've been miserable and my thoughts have, driven me crazy. And I know right now I'm happy. And it's like, yeah, there you go, right? Sometimes it is really keeping it that simple. And that happens through examination and kind of, again, just really questioning where some things come from. I think even when people care about us and are well-intentioned, their advice can come from a place of fear instead of love. And I don't mean like that they don't have love for you. I mean the actual advice itself is coming from a place of fear instead of love. Because they don't want to see you get hurt. Of course, and we would call that a noble thing. When you really sort of break down that idea and just it all, never deny someone their suffering. And that sounds very callous. What does that mean? Well, look at your life. Hasn't any major breakthrough, anything meaningful come from essentially pain? So why deny that for somebody else? We all have our journey. And it doesn't mean you can't be there to support them and help and guide them and so forth. But too often times we try to prescribe, well, many times even without asking, to people. In reality, we should be prescribing to ourselves. It's very fascinating in that way. But yeah, I just sort of it might sound not like a lot, but I feel a lightness in the way that I operate. My writing has become easier to do and more fun. And I'm like, yeah, things are coming together. And, even this weekend, I went to see a friend's film at the Chinese theater. It was their premiere, and it was just so fun, right? Whereas before, I don't know, I might have been more in my head about certain stuff or whatever. I don't know. I was just light on my feet. And I even did a cooking class with my friend Tammy. It was a Native American themed cooking class, and that was just a lot of fun, right? And so, to me, I'm just in a weird way just enjoying life more, right? Because I've let go of the idea of what is supposed to be. I'm much more focused on the process of it all, right? As I said, from start to finish. I don't try to force things if they're not going in a certain direction. And because of it, the world is becoming my oyster in a way. And as I sort of continue, on my journey, that's certainly what I'm going to try to really put into words and, showcase also through my actions of what's possible. Because a lot is possible. And I have the benefit of knowing that because of the people who've paved the path before me. For me, I look to people like Robert Rodriguez, Juan Kar-wai, Christopher Nolan, Richard Linklater, and so on, right? And even authors, right? Like a Charles Bukowski, who didn't really hit until he was about 50. But he was certainly working way before then. And that's inspiring, as I kind of talked about as far as limiting beliefs, like if you just study history, you learn that a lot of what we believe hasn't always held up to be the case. And in many ways, you can find inspiration by going in history. Art history, sure, but also just history in general. And yes, like all things, there's negative things to learn. And you want to learn those things so that way we're not doomed to repeat those things. But find the inspiring stuff, utilize that for yourself. And, to me, all that stuff is fun. And it is worthwhile because it makes my art all the more richer. And even if it didn't make my art richer, it just makes my life more richer. And I don't mean financially. I mean in the meaningful sense, right? So, and that's my message to you is, if there's a limiting belief that, that's been holding you back, or someone tells you something, question it and really get at the root of why it is that you or they believe that, and how can you overcome it. As always, I'm more than happy to help. Comment down below or hit me up on social media at Phil Svitek. And, if you can't work through the problem, let's do it. Let me know and I'll try to come up with ideas, right? After all, that's what I aim to do with these sort of episodes and just the stuff that I put out. And so thank you as always. If you appreciate what I do and would like to have more direct interaction, well, there's of course my coaching, which is available to you. Link is provided down below. Or if you want to sort of dip your toe in, well, I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Phil Svitek. There's various tiers of support with various benefits. And also, as I made mention, I create art, and I've linked to it down below. Maybe you're just curious. That's another way to support me because, of course, as that stuff becomes self-sustaining, then I get to create more of it, learn various lessons, and share them here freely with you. That is my goal. Right? And I will keep doing this as long as I can, right? And of course, there's going to be times where, priorities shift and I'm going to have to, as I've done in the past, like take a week off here and there or put out less. And, that's all part of the process and having the grace with myself to do it. But I know in my heart of hearts, this is meaningful. I'm going to continue doing it. Same as with everything else because it's just too much fun. Right? So, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I hope to see you next time.